The HOA burned my lake mansion to the ground, all over $680 in fake fees. They thought I was a squatter until the day I watched them stand in my courtroom in handcuffs. The smell is what I'll never forget. Not the kind from a normal fire, this one was colder, cleaner, almost intentional. I stood there, boots sinking into the blackened earth that used to be my living room, staring at the chimney jutting up like a tombstone. Everything Sarah and I built, every nail I drove, every note she'd hummed while painting the porch, it was all gone. I'd spent 2 years turning that place into a retreat for Gold Star families. It was supposed to be called Haven House, and now it was just ash. The county fire marshal, Bill, a guy I'd known for years, pulled up the driveway. He couldn't look me in the eye. "Mike," he said, flipping through his clipboard, "official report says it was a controlled demolition, authorized." I stared at him. Authorized by who, Bill? He swallowed. "The Sterling Lake HOA said you abandoned the property." I laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Abandoned? I live here." He shifted, uncomfortably mumbled something about unpaid fees, and left me standing there among the ashes of my life. $680. That's what they said I owed. That's what they burned me for. I'd never even received a bill. My grandfather bought this land 60 years ago, before the HOA even existed. I used to be a firefighter, before that an Army engineer. I know what fire looks like when it's accidental. This wasn't one. This was an execution. It all started a year earlier with a letter taped to my door. Before that, the HOA was just a name on a sign at the neighborhood entrance. But then came her, Karen DeLansancy, freshly elected HOA president, a realtor with a plastic smile and a clipboard that might as well have been a weapon. The kind of woman who looked at a lake and saw property values instead of peace. The letter said my dock extended 12 inches too far into the lake. It was the same dock my father and I built 20 years ago. The next week, another letter, a fine for unapproved roofing shingles. Then, another unauthorized landscaping. It became a rhythm, a drumbeat of harassment. I went to the next HOA meeting to reason with them. The clubhouse was sterile fluorescent, filled with folding chairs and forced smiles. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 yes-men. I explained everything politely, how my land predated their HOA, how the bylaws didn't apply to me. She smiled, that kind of smile that's all teeth and no warmth, and said, "Mr. Halley, you enjoy the benefits of our community. The landscaped entrance, the road maintenance. You can't just opt out of rules you don't like." Then in front of everyone she added, "Frankly, we have these covenants to keep squatters from lowering the character of our neighborhood." That word hit me like a slap. Squatter. I gathered my papers and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. A week later, I got a notice from the county clerk the HOA had filed a lien against my home for unpaid fees, $680. That was the day I realized this wasn't about rules. It was a campaign, and I was the target. I must have stood in my driveway for an hour just staring at the letter. That's when my neighbor Joe Ritchie wandered over. Quiet guy, mid-60s widower, always tending his roses. He looked at the paper and frowned. "Trouble with DeLansancy." I nodded. "Used to be a federal prosecutor," he said. "Let me look into this for you. No charge." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. A few weeks later, I had to leave town for a veterans charity event, something I volunteered for every year. I left Thursday morning feeling lighter. Joe was on the case. When I came back Sunday afternoon, I smelled smoke before I saw anything. Then I saw nothing at all. My house was gone. Scraped clean, the earth scorched flat. A yellow sign read, "Property reclaimed by the Sterling Lake Homeowners Association." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked into the woods and sat down on a fallen log, staring through the trees at the smoke rising over the lake. They'd lit the wrong fire. I bought a cheap travel trailer and parked it deep in the pines. Set up cameras, stayed quiet. That's when the harassment began. Late one night, a flashlight hit my window and a voice boomed, "HOA, security. You have 24 hours to vacate." Some guy in a fake uniform badge glinting under my motion light. I didn't open the door. The next morning, there was an orange sticker on my truck windshield threatening to tow it. He came back every night for a week. I just let the cameras roll. Meanwhile, Joe and I started digging. He pulled property records business filings meeting minutes. A pattern emerged: retirees fined into foreclosure their homes bought up by an LLC linked to Karen's husband. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was clearing the neighborhood for profit. My property, the biggest on the lake, was her prize. Then she made her biggest mistake. She filed a trespassing charge against me. On my own land. That was the turning point. Joe told me a criminal complaint changes everything. Now, evidence rules apply. I called two people, Carla Baines, an investigative reporter, and my buddy Tank Morales, a former Department of Defense contract specialist who now ran an RV shop. Tank could sniff out corporate dirt like nobody else. Within a week, he called me almost laughing. "Mike, you're not going to believe this. The HOA doesn't own their common areas. They're leased from an old shell company, Sterling Services LLC, that was dissolved 10 years ago for unpaid taxes. That company technically still owns everything. How much unpaid, I asked. $1,500, he said. I paid it the next morning. Just like that, I legally owned Sterling Services LLC, the entity that controlled every contract and right-of-way the HOA depended on. Landscaping, trash collection, even their private security. I was now their landlord. That night, I printed 50 notices. Effective immediately. Sterling Services LLC terminates all contracts with Sterling Lake HOA. Unauthorized personnel will be prosecuted for trespassing. I posted them on every sign, every bulletin board, even taped one to the fake cop's car. The look on his face was priceless. Karen lost it. The next day, her lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter full of threats. I made 50 copies and taped those up too with a handwritten note underneath. They burned my house down. They forged liens. They're threatening to sue me. If you've been bullied, meet me at the fire station Tuesday at 6. I didn't expect much, maybe 5 people. When I walked in, every chair was full. Over 100 residents stood shoulder to shoulder, angry, scared, finally ready. One by one, they spoke fines for bird feeders, liens for faded mailboxes, demands to remove a son's pickup truck. A retired county clerk stood up and said, "Those lien forms she's using. They're obsolete, haven't been valid for years. Fraud, every bit of it." We didn't yell, we planned. The next HOA meeting would be our battlefield. When Karen walked into that clubhouse, she wore power-like armor, bright red suit clipboard clutched tight. Then she saw the crowd. Every seat filled every neighbor she'd bullied staring right back at her. I walked to the front, laid 3 documents on the table. "Karen," I said evenly, "this is the ownership transfer for Sterling Services, LLC. This is the lease agreement your HOA's been operating under since 1989. And this I placed the last page as the notice of termination." Her face drained. She stammered, "You can't do this. I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you." I didn't even raise my voice. "You can't sue us, Karen, because you're not a legitimate board. You're a racket." A week later, we were both in court, but this time she was the defendant. She strutted in, wearing another red suit, her lawyer whispering in her ear. Joe sat beside me, calm as ever, flipping through his worn leather briefcase. When the hearing began, he dismantled her empire piece by piece. First, the county clerk testified the demolition order that destroyed my house was forged, the signature fake, the case number non-existent. Then the former HOA treasurer admitted under oath that Karen had approved payments to a shell company owned by her husband. Finally, Joe handed Karen 2 documents. One was the payment authorization for the demolition company signed by her. The other was the forged court order used to justify it. The signatures were identical. The courtroom went silent. The judge's voice cut through like a blade. "Bailiffs escort Mrs. Delancey to my chambers." 2 officers stepped forward. No handcuffs yet. They just flanked her, guiding her out. She looked at me as she passed, her eyes wide hollow. For the first time, she wasn't in control. She never came back. The state attorney general took over the case. Fraud, racketeering, malicious destruction of property. She pled guilty. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, no parole for the first 2. Her board resigned in disgrace. The HOA dissolved. The liens vanished like the smoke that had once hung over my lake. I didn't rebuild right away. I lived in that trailer for a while, just listening to the water, watching the sun set through the trees. They burned my house to ash thinking they'd erase me. But fire doesn't just destroy, it refines. It hardens. And in the end, I didn't just win back my land, I won back my community. Sometimes justice doesn't rise from rage, it rises from the ashes.